Hello, this is Tom Lohre telling the story of how Clio got to Russia, or at least 30 miles from the border. It started 15 years ago in 2009 when Willard discovered that I had crossed the North Atlantic and we started sailing my little boat on the Ohio. And then Willard got a boat from his cousin that we sailed on the Ohio in Lake Erie for a good number of years. And 7 years ago, we discovered the Bayfield, the boat we were going to rebuild to take to Europe. So it took 7 years on the hard, and then finally we set off, the three amigos, and we left Port Clinton with all good intentions, but discovered a big leak, 12 gallons an hour with the engine running, and we had to return, take the boat out of the water, and excavate some material around the stern tube, encase it in epoxy, and then put the engine back. So for all intents and purposes, it was a week. But all the time we had wonderful food. Willard is a fantastic cook, and here we are approaching Buffalo after motoring most of the time. And then we got went up the mast and took the mast down, and then the next day we had to rebuild some of the stays, and here we are with the mast on the boat ready to set off on the Erie Canal. Now there's 31 locks on the Erie Canal, and we would make about 3 a day. It's about 300 miles on the canal, but all the time we'd have wonderful meal, incredible cook, and we stopped and picked up some charts from Willard's aunt along the way, and then in the middle of Lake Oneida, a big boat came by and rocked the boat so hard that the mast fell out of the cradle on the bow and landed in the lifelines on the side. So had the lifelines not been taut, the mast may have gone over, but we were able to sneak back into the canal and have a crane put the mast back on the boat. Off we went, eventually putting the mast back up on the Hudson River. Here we are going around Manhattan and sailing up to Plymouth. This is a typical view inside the cabin with Chuck sleeping with the lee cloth. And of course, we had wonderful food. Willard's an incredible cook. And here I am sailing and rowing the little emergency boat and our lifeboat and our dinghy. And we were in Boston, and we picked up 2 grocery carts of food in preparation for the crossing. Here I am with Jane, Willard's sister. His family came to show him off. And as soon as we set off in the Gulf of Maine, we ran against contrary winds to push the boat back. Then there was no winds and light winds, so we put the spinnaker up for a little bit, trying to work on that. And here Will is making notes in the log, very important. And of course, there would be days with no wind at all, and the birds would just hang around, and we would have a wonderful meal waiting for the wind. Of course, all the winds seemingly came from the bow. We always had headwinds, and here's an isotopic chart of the weather, and it was difficult putting up with the headwinds all the time, followed by lows. But here you saw we'd get off track because the winds weren't favorable. Here we are off Halifax, and here we are on the bottom part of a low, which is giving us a little bit of wind. And here we are, 3 rafted out, 3 at St. John's, and Jim Winters really helped get the boat ready for the crossing. Here I am checking the self-steering in the emergency suit, and we let it dry out, and we set off the next day for the crossing. And of course, we immediately ran into headwinds, but they would subside, and we'd have no winds, and we'd have a wonderful meal by Chef Willard. Here's a typical view of the cabin. Chuck sewing, Willard's working on his book. Here I am sleeping under my drip cloth. I had a drip above my bunk, and the rain would drip off it. And this is the bird that followed us all the way across the North Atlantic. Had a V-tail, but you can see the sails are pulled tight, and occasionally I would play guitar in the evening a little bit. It was fun to do a few reels, but the same bird was always there with us. It was incredible how they just showed up, constantly there eating. And here's the track. You can see that we get contrary winds, it pushes off course, and then we get some no wind and then have some decent wind. So But one time, when there was no wind and a clear sky, we saw the green flash twice. It was an amazing sight. And occasionally would get a few favorable winds. But here we see once again we're about in the mid Atlantic and there's headwinds. You can see the sails are pulled really incredibly tight, close hauled, and then there'd be no wind and the birds would just hang out. They just eat scraps off the surface. And one day I stepped out in the cockpit and I saw a gigantic sperm whale tail going down 60 feet from the boat. And this reminds me of a painting I did for Captain Eric, who taught me most of my knowledge in ocean sailing. I think that was Captain Eric because he passed away while we were crossing the North Atlantic. And here Willard and I are going out to make a sail change. It was pretty quick. We could do all the sail changes from the cockpit. But once again, those birds, that little forked tail, they would just wander around and fly around the boat. But we'd always get a tough sea. Here we are, Chuck, the view from the bow.
So we've spotted a whole pod of pilot whales that are here checking out the sailboat, saying hi to their strange robotic companion out here in the sea, wondering what we're doing. So they're right here. They're just right along with us. They're just like following along, following the Piper here. Wow, this is some big.
Yeah. I'm trying to take another shot to see if I get anybody closer. They're very close. I mean,
There's a lot of them here. They're all around us.
closest is 20 feet away.
I can't even see their eyes. Wow, easy.
Yeah, look, they're right here.
Just following right along with us. 3 knots. All the pilot whales. Yeah, they're hanging next to their mothers. That's what they do all day. Hang out. That's really cool. It's a nice greeting to the North Atlantic. Thank God you didn't run away thinking we were going to kill them.
But we always had that same bird following us the whole way, and you can see by the boat gyrating one side or another, the waves are pretty big. And here we are stalled off the top of Scotland. You saw we got a loop there, and I kept on drawing up these charts to try to make sense of what was going on. John Quincy Adams suffered the same problem. Here's a weather map of it, and you can see that the low was coming down out of the north. It was pushing us towards Rona Island. We got very close until the wind changed enough but this is our first sight of land in about 30 days. And here the red is our route, the blue is John Quincy's route, and we both suffered trying to get around the top of Scotland. But always we had the wonderful food. It was just fantastic. It kept us alive and happy. And we always had plenty of coffee, nice French press coffee. Of course, everything is tied down. And occasionally we'd put the spinnaker pole out to hike out the Yankee. And then we started taking our sextant readings. I was trying to relearn my celestial navigation. And then ate a little bit of seaweed, but I discovered later that it had too much arsenic in it. But it's wonderful. It's very tasty, and it's full of life, little organisms. This is our go-to navigational device, the Garmin inReach. It had a little map. It told us if we were off course. We communicated with the family via satellite. And in the North Atlantic, everything gets oiled. So I went around with an oil can and two little brushes, oiling everything. It just gets into everything. And here I am working out the reductions from our sextant readings. And here's a little piece of the pro forma that you do your calculations on. Here, Chuck is embroidering the name of the boat on a jacket to give to Willard we picked up in St. John's, Clio from Cincinnati. And here's Chuck's wonderful hors d'oeuvres of deviled ham on crackers with pickles, and he fried up some spam with some soy sauce and oyster sauce. But this is the lowest of the low. Too rough to cook. We'd have soup. And then it lightened up a little bit, and I started making bread. I would raise about half a loaf. We would have maybe 10 different loaves of this size. It was incredible. It was very tasty, hot, delicious, and we'd put pesto on it. But here you can, once again, here we are in the North Sea. Finally made our turn around Scotland, and we ran into this oil rig where we got too close, and they called us and told us to stay away. Some strange number. Here's the typical view inside the cabin, and we finally made it to Kristiansand, Norway. And this is the boat's hull after 37 days. Everything worked out well, but as soon as we set off from Kristiansand, the wheel locked up. Turns out the stainless steel rod goes through aluminum bushing, and the salt water will seize it. So we went back, oiled it up, and set off. Here we are rounding the top of Denmark on our way to Helsingør. We spent a few days in Helsingør. That's where Shakespeare staged The Tempest, and a Helsingør journalist saw that our boat was combined with a Russian boat in the Ocean and wondered why, and she wrote a story about it. So off we set from Helsingør, went past Copenhagen, went through the canal, and then turned out the waves picked up, so we went back into the canal and waited out the winds that were blowing like the Dickens, but then this large boat came by to show us that you could do it. And, well, we eventually set off again, but then high winds picked up, so we tucked into this little hamlet in Sweden. And as we arrived, there were surfers right in the entrance of the harbor, and we had to snake right through them. And here's the Clio tied up at what's called the Swedish Stonehenge. It's a beautiful collection of rocks, but off we went off in a couple of days, and we saw various warships. Here's Chuck reading 2 years before the mast in his bunk. And here's Willard out on deck working on some problem. And we didn't see any American warships, but I don't think they broadcast their AIS. They're totally silent. But the winds really picked up properly at the end of the trip. We went wing on wing for quite a while, and we ran into this cargo ship named Thalia. Now Chuck had invented an AI named Thalia, and it was funny to see that cargo ship, that name. Here's Thalia in Chuck's bunk and the view from the engine room. She didn't know too much. And anyway, these little green triangles are ships that are just anchored there in the Gulf of Finland, waiting for something. This is the last night at sea. I saw the northern lights, and Willard was hailed. We were hailed by the Finnish Coast Guard asking our intentions, and we had no bad intentions. We just wanted to get to Kotka. So Kotka is a small island, and we had a wonderful stay and took the boat out across the river, and we were able to find accommodations for storing the boat. We spent a good number of days breaking down the boat. This is the only damage we occurred, a little bit of the trail board. This is what got us all the way across. The self-steering worked flawless. It was incredible. We did have some chafing inside we'll have to address, but all intents and purposes, the hull was perfect. The zinc was only a third gone. We started airing out the boat, opening up all the lockers, hanging up all the lines. You can see the deck of the cabin is just full of stuff in preparation of leaving. going back to America. So everything would be fresh when we got to the boat. It would take about 3 days to get the thing back in the water and take it to home. Now here we are, our bags are packed, and we left the boat. And then a couple of days later, the boat was taken inside this gigantic super yacht shed with the mast up. And beer is what we had a beer each day underway, or we had a glass of wine. Willard really loved the Costa Rhone, so whenever we had an opportunity, we'd get a nice bottle and enjoy that or a beer. We had 2 drinks a day, and then every evening we would top off a wonderful day with a toast of bourbon and some nice chocolate. It was a wonderful trip. Thank you very much, Willard. And my wife and all the wives, because we couldn't have done it without you.